Good morning, class. Today's topic is learning and memory. Learning objectives are define learning and memory, classify learning and memory, and give examples for each category, and briefly explain the types and significance of conditioned reflexes, describe the mechanism of learning and memory, and name the brain areas involved in different types of learning and memory, and understand the physiological basis of abnormalities. Okay, so these things you should be able to know after completing this learning and memory topic. So coming to the definitions, so this learning is defined as acquirement of information or knowledge by experience that results in alteration of behavior. So these definitions you can write on your own also. So learning and memory, all those things. But these are textbook definitions. So yeah, exam purpose in an examination you should write as it is from the textbook. Okay, so that's why try to remember, repeat after me and then remember, and also you can write in your notes. Okay, so acquirement of information and knowledge by experience that results in the alteration of behavior. So learning is a sincere attitude and readiness to perform an assigned task. It depends mostly on motivation that creates adequate interest and attention to promote learning. Okay, so the basic drive behind learning is motivation. Okay, so without motivation, nobody can learn anything. And the memory is defined as retention of learned information and experiences. So whatever the information and knowledge we have gained by our experience, that is retained, and that is called memory. So this memory has four stages. So registration of memory, that includes proper perception and attention, and integration and retention, recognition and recall, and then reutilization. So these are the four stages of memory. In the first stage, failure of learning and memory occurs due to impaired perception and attention because the material to be learned is never registered and assimilated. Okay, so first thing is registration by proper perception and attention. So whatever we are teaching, whatever we are explaining in the class lecture hall, so that if you don't pay attention, that will not be registered in your brain. So that is the first thing. So uh, for that purpose, if you take anything which you are going to learn, okay, so the infant who is learning to walk, so that person, that infant also is that steps learning immediate early steps have to be registered in mind, then only he learns slowly step by step walking. Okay, and then integration and retention. Learned experiences are processed and integrated by various structures in the central nervous system and then retained at appropriate place in the brain in the form of short-term or long-term memory. Okay, and then recognition and recall. At the appropriate time and place, the memory is recalled for proper use. Okay, so that whatever the information is stored, that will be recalled for at appropriate time and place. And reutilization, the memory is utilized for improvement of further learning. And the types of memory, this is broadly divided into explicit or declarative memory and implicit or non-declarative memory. So this is the broad classification or division of learning and memory. Okay, explicit or declarative, implicit or non-declarative. So these words, terms are new to you. Okay, try to pronounce again and again, then only you will be able to remember. Explicit or declarative, this is the memory of facts, that is semantic memory or memory of events, episodic. Okay, so at particular event you went particular function, marriage function, so that is a event, so that memory regarding that marriage is episodic memory. And memory of facts means some truth or fact that will be always truth. Okay, so that is stored in your memory, so that is called semantic memory. So these explicit or declarative memory is again of two types, short term and long term. And then implicit or non-declarative memory. So this is having all these types of memory. So first in implicit we have priming, and then procedural memory, which includes skills and habits, and then associative learning and non-associative learning. Okay, so in associative we have classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In non-associative learning we have habituation and sensitization. So the explicit memory and many forms of implicit memory involve short-term and long-term memories. Okay, so in both the explicit and implicit we have short-term and long-term memories. So but the classification is like this. Okay, explicit or declarative, implicit or non-declarative. So we will see first one, explicit memory, so also known as declarative, which is connected with awareness. Okay, so remember this word, it is connected with awareness. The person is awake. By knowing, he is remembering these things. It has two forms: memory of events, which is episodic, or and the memory of facts, which is semantic memory. So episodic and semantic. So it is dependent upon the hippocampus for retention. Short-term memory is the memory that lasts for seconds to hours, during which processing in hippocampus and elsewhere lays down long-term changes in synaptic strength. Okay, so hippocampus and elsewhere, that is other areas of brain. So it lays down long-term changes in the synaptic strength. So that is short-term memory. And long-term memory is the one that stores information for years together and sometimes for life. So that is long-term memory. And the implicit memory is not associated with awareness and is therefore also called reflexive or non-declarative memory. So it is not associated with awareness, so it is also called reflexive. So it comes as a reflex action. Okay, without awareness of a person, this memory is being stored. So it includes the skills, habits, priming and conditioned reflexes, etc. So it is initially required to develop implicit memory. So the explicit memory, which we have seen before, that is initially required, then only this implicit, because the skill or habit or anything which we have learned, first it should be registered, right? So for that, explicit memory should be present. So with this explicit memory, it is initially registered and then it converts to implicit. It becomes like a reflex action, habit. Immediately after getting up, our habit is brushing and doing our daily routine work. So that is implicit memory. For example, a learner of motorcycle riding initially remembers the steps of changing the gear with conscious knowledge till it becomes a reflexive habit to do so. So that will be becoming changing the gear without awareness. So once the skill is acquired, the act becomes unconscious and automatic. So that is converting to implicit memory. So in the implicit we have priming. Priming is the facilitation of recognition of words or objects by prior exposure to them. Okay, an example is improved recall of a word when presented with first few letters of it. So sometimes we don't remember a word, but if we tell first one or two letters, immediately we get that. Okay, so that is priming. It is facilitation of recognition of words or objects by prior exposure to them. And then the procedural memory. It includes the skills and habits which once acquired become unconscious and automatic. And the non-associative learning, it is the organism learning about a single stimulus. Okay, so this word is important, single stimulus. So examples, habituation and sensitization. Associative learning, associates, in the word name itself the meaning is there. The organism learns about the relation of one stimulus with other. Okay, here single stimulus, here one stimulus with the other. So the classical example is conditioned response. Okay, so in the names only the meaning are there, so try to remember the headings first. Okay, then you can automatically tell the meaning of that type of memory or learning. So in habituation and sensitization, what does they mean? Habituation, it is a form of learning in which repeated application of a neutral stimulus, single stimulus, okay, elicits less and less response. Okay, so here you can see repeated application of neutral stimulus elicits less and less, means the neurons or the branches have been decreased here, you can see. So the response is becoming less and less. And sensitization is the opposite reaction in which repeated application of stimulus evokes greater and greater response. The branches are increasing, number of synapses are increasing. So this is sensitization, and habituation means the response will be decreased. Okay, so these two are the important topics. So the meanings or the explanation is like this. So coming to the conditioned reflexes, so it is defined as reflex response to a stimulus that hardly elicited any response in the past. Okay, so a stimulus which has not at all responded in the past, but presently the response to the stimulus is acquired to this stimulus which does not elicited any response. To that stimulus, response is acquired. How? By pairing the stimulus with another stimulus. So this another stimulus normally produces the response. Okay, so this pairing is called conditioned response. Okay, there are two types of conditioned responses. One is classical conditioning and other is operant conditioning. Conditioned reflexes have two components that are associated with emotional responses and motor responses. So emotional responses are regulated by amygdala and motor responses are controlled by cerebellum. So we will see now about classical conditioning. So a stimulus that normally elicits a specific innate response is called unconditioned stimulus. Okay, so here the stimulus that normally elicits a specific innate response, innate means inborn, is called unconditioned stimulus, and an arbitrary stimulus that normally does not produce any response on application does produce a significant response when paired with unconditioned stimulus is called conditioned stimulus. Okay, so this, if you compare or if you relate with the previous definition, you can understand better. So the typical example for this classical conditioning is Ian Pavlov's experiment on salivation in dog. So this is before conditioning, and then during conditioning and after conditioning. So in this Ian Pavlov's experiment, what he did first, Pavlov produced salivation in dog. Okay, so this is unconditioned stimulus, that is food, and natural stimulus is neutral stimulus is ringing of bell, and without food with this neutral stimulus no response. Okay, and this is the food. By the smell also the response will be seen, smell of the food. Okay, so during conditioning what is happening, uh, it produced saliva. The dog produced saliva by placing a piece of meat in its mouth. Then he rung bell just before placing the meat in dog's mouth and repeated the procedure number of times till the animal was made to salivate with bell ringing, and finally without even placing the meat in the mouth. Okay, so what is happening during conditioning, he paired both the stimuli. So first this is unconditioned and this is neutral stimulus. Okay, so unconditioned response and no response. So when both these are paired with bell ringing and then placing the meat in the mouth, the response is saliva production, that is seen. And after conditioning, for some period this thing has taken place, this process has taken place, and without unconditioned stimulus, that is without food, even with the neutral stimulus, the dog is able to produce saliva. Okay, so that is the response obtained by this experiment. So this is classical conditioning. And then operant conditioning. In this, the animal is trained to carry out a task for either to receive a reward or to avoid a punishment. So here what is happening, animal is trained to carry out a task, particular work it has to do, and for that either to receive a reward or to avoid a punishment. So by doing this task, the animal will get a reward or it avoids a punishment. So that's how it is trained. The unconditioned stimulus may be pleasant or unpleasant. Conditioned stimulus is applied as a signal in the form of light or sound that alerts the animal to perform a task. B.F. Skinner has extensively studied this type of conditioning. The animal is usually kept in a Skinner box in which provision is made in such a way that pressing a bar results in delivery of food pellet or prevention of electric shock. So this is delivery of food pellet is pleasant event and prevention of electric shock is unpleasant. That is, this is avoiding punishment and this is receiving a reward. So this the animal is kept in a Skinner box in which the provision is made in such a way that pressing a bar is action, okay, task. Pressing a bar is a task and this is reward and this is punishment. So in this picture you can see that this is a mouse here, animal, experimental animal, and then this is the electrified floor which gives electric shock, and here the food pellet dispenser, and these are the lights, speaker. So pressing a bar is the task and then receiving a food pellet is the reward and electric shock is the punishment. So what is happening here? So initially the response occurs by chance, okay. So sometimes the food was given, sometimes the shock was given, but later the animal learns the prevention of how to prevent the shock and how to receive food always, okay. So that's how this experiment, this is operant conditioning, right? Okay, so positive reinforcement is mouse given food when lever is pressed after green light, okay, and negative is loud noise stopped when lever is pressed. So with the positive reinforcement it increases likelihood of repeated behavior, and something given to the mouse in the positive, something taken from the mouse is negative. So decreases this repeated behavior decreases when mouse is shocked when lever pressed after red light, and here negative punishment it's not applicable here because something is not taken from the mouse already. In the positive reinforcement punishment itself the shock is given, okay. So now coming to the mechanisms of learning and memory. So these mechanisms may be cellular or molecular, neural and biochemical. So we will see molecular mechanisms and then next neural and biochemical. So in the molecular mechanisms, learning and memory are initiated and established by several neurochemical changes like increased synaptic connection, neurotransmitter secretion, formation of intracellular second messengers and protein synthesis and gene activation. So all these are the mechanisms. So for habituation and sensitization to occur, there happens change in the neurotransmitter release at the sensory neuron terminals due to alteration in intracellular calcium. So this is the mechanism for habituation and sensitization. So what is it? Change in neurotransmitter release, okay, at the sensory neuron terminals because of alteration of increase or decrease intracellular calcium. And then the mechanism for conditioning. In classical conditioning, pairing of unconditioned stimulus with conditioned stimulus causes biochemical changes in the target neurons. So the basic mechanism is prolongation of action potential that causes presynaptic facilitation. And post-tetanic potentiation is the production of enhanced postsynaptic potentials in response to stimulations. Okay, this enhancement lasts up to 60 seconds and occurs after a brief tetanizing or train of stimuli in the presynaptic neuron. So the tetanizing stimulation causes calcium to accumulate in the presynaptic neuron to such a degree that intracellular binding sites that keeps cytoplasmic calcium low or overwhelmed. Okay, so enhanced postsynaptic potentials in response to and stimulation is called post-tetanic potentiation. So why tetanic means increased amount, the frequency of stimulation is increased. So that is tetanizing stimuli. Okay. So this tetanizing stimulation causes calcium to accumulate in the presynaptic neuron, because with each stimulation calcium releases from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So that's how the neuron got accumulated of more calcium. So these intracellular binding sites are overwhelmed with the calcium concentration. So that is enhanced or post-tetanic potentiation. And learning and long-term potentiation. The physiological process of learning is inadequately explained due to the complex mechanisms involved in it. So we will see what is long-term potentiation by learning. So long-term potentiation, it is an important process for establishment of learning and memory. And in this, the initial step is phosphorylation of a number of proteins, and later on the subsequent intracellular mechanism of action takes place. Second messenger synthesis and enzymes, proteins will come into action, and synaptic connections develop. New synaptic connections will develop, so their number will be increased. So this long-term potentiation is of hippocampal. So it takes place in the hippocampus. So here the potentiation of impulse transmission is it lasts for days to weeks, and when they are stimulated at high frequency. So high frequency stimulation will be the stimulus for this potentiation of impulse transmission. And this hippocampal LTP is of two types: mossy fiber LTP, which is NMDA independent, and Schaffer collateral LTP, which is dependent on NMDA, N-methyl D-aspartate. So these receptors are responsible for this hippocampal LTP. And long-term depression, it is just opposite of LTP. It is characterized by decrease in synaptic strength. Here the synaptic connections increases, here the synaptic strength decreases. It requires phosphorylation of AMPA receptors, AMPA. Okay. In cerebellum, decreased responsiveness of these receptors is observed in long-term depression. So what is this AMPA? So you find it out on Google. So it's also given in your textbooks. Okay. So these are the pictures showing the long-term potentiation. So here you can see glutamate present in the synaptic vesicles, and the NMDA receptors present here, and the calcium influx taking place, so that there will be potentiation occurs. And here also you can see AMPA receptors and NMDA receptors. The receptors increases, and then the calcium concentration increases, the various mechanisms or the sequence takes place, and genes get activated. So potentiation, long-term potentiation will take place. And neural mechanisms of learning. So prefrontal cortex is critical for coordinating the process of learning and memory. The cerebral cortex processes information related to learning and communicates them to the limbic structures. The prefrontal cortex gathers sensory information from the somatosensory, visual, and auditory cortices. So it also integrates inputs related to language and mathematical ability in the light of previously acquired learning. So the main thing is prefrontal cortex, which is critical for coordinating the process of learning and memory. It also gathers the sensory information and integrates the inputs. So this prefrontal cortex is considered as the site of working memory. So this will be an MCQ for you. So what is the site of working memory means? It's a prefrontal cortex. So new experiences are processed in the prefrontal cortex, and the processed information is then transmitted to the hippocampus, where the long-term memory will be present. That is because of long-term potentiation. And consolidation of information occurs in the hippocampus over several hours into a lasting form, that is many years, several hours to years. Then learned experience is stored in the association cortices from where it can be retrieved whenever needed. And the neural mechanisms of declarative and procedural memory are: in declarative memory, which is the events and facts and ability to knowingly access them, that is explicit or declarative memory. It is integrated in the medial portion of temporal lobe. Patients who have undergone bilateral medial temporal lobectomy, for example, for the treatment of intractable temporal epilepsy, lose their declarative memories or become incapable in forming new declarative memory but retain the procedural. So suppose this medial portion of temporal lobe has some defect, so we have to do surgical procedure for this epilepsy. Then these people will be losing all the declarative memory which has been present before, but they will be able to retain the procedural memory. So this is declarative memory. And procedural memory, which is nothing but skills and habits. It is integrated in different parts of the brain depending on the type of task learned and remembered. So learning and remembering new motor skills and habits requires striatum, motor cortex and cerebellum. Remembering emotional components associated with tasks require amygdala. And learning the condition reflexes require the cerebellum and cortex. So these are all the things which we have already seen in the previous slides, but then the neural or different areas of the brain related to different memories are these. And coming to short term and long term memory, short term is seconds to minutes and long term days to years. So the short term memory, as I have already told you, it is the prefrontal cortex. Or the working memory, the site of working memory is prefrontal cortex. So example, you can see here, before an individual dials a telephone number, first he sees the number and repeats till the number is dialed. Then he forgets the number quickly once he starts talking on the phone. So that is working memory. So short-term memory is converted to long-term memory by three ways. By repeating the process of learning frequently and by adding more than one sensory modality to the process of learning. For example, writing. While reading, writing. At the same time, hearing a newly acquired knowledge. So by associating the process of particular learning with meaningful emotional event. So by these process, short term will be converted to long term. So role of cholinergic neurons in memory. Acetylcholine is a major transmitter in learning and memory, and other is cognitive function. Cholinergic neurons that are present plentifully in the basal forebrain region project to the hippocampus and different parts of cerebral cortex. So the cell bodies of these neurons are highly concentrated in basal forebrain nuclei, especially in the nucleus basalis of Maynard and the nucleus accumbens. Cholinergic fibers are also the main projecting neurons from brainstem reticular formation to the thalamus and spinal cord. So loss of cortical and subcortical cholinergic neurons, especially in the basal forebrain region, is associated with dementia, that is loss of memory, abstract thinking and judgment. Okay, so that's how this cortical and subcortical cholinergic neurons are important. And the biochemical basis. So we have seen the molecular and neural, and now biochemical basis. Changes underlying learning is repeated transmission of impulses along the neural circuits that results in permanent changes in the concerned neuron. One important consequence is new protein formation in the nerve cells and increased RNA synthesis in response to learning, and recently it has been suggested that activation of specific gene. So these three are the biochemical basis for learning. Okay, new protein formation, increased RNA synthesis and activation of specific gene. Strangeness and familiarity. Stimulation of some parts of temporal lobes causes change in interpretation of one's surroundings, such as subjects feel strange in a familiar place or familiarity with the new events. So such strangeness or familiarity helps the normal individual to adjust to different environments. But inappropriate feeling or familiarity with new events or surroundings is clinically known as deja vu phenomenon. Okay, a French word which means already seen. So this is normal for adjusting the individual to different environments, but this is inappropriate with people having deja vu phenomenon. So this usually occurs as an aura that precedes the onset of temporal lobe epilepsy. So this slide shows the brain areas for integration of various forms of memory. So this already I have explained you in the previous slides. So you just have a look and then note down the explicit or declarative memory, implicit or non-declarative memory. So these are the brain areas for different types of memory. And lastly, coming to the applied part, amnesia, which means impairment of memory. There are two forms, retrograde and anterograde amnesia. So this is a short question for you and very short also, and MCQs also. So retrograde amnesia is loss of memory for events that just precede the head injury, or the disease is called retrograde amnesia. Okay, that just precede the head injury or the disease. Usually the loss occurs only for short-term memory. It occurs commonly in head injury in which patient develops concussion. Anterograde amnesia is inability to recall the memory or to form new memories after the event, that is head injury, is called anterograde amnesia. And then dementia, it is a syndrome, okay, not one symptom. Syndrome is a group of symptoms consisting of several intellectual inabilities. The deficits occur for many cognitive functions including learning and memory. It occurs in many conditions that affect cortical functions. The most common is senile dementia. Senile is as the age advances in elderly. Pathological dementia is commonly seen in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. However, during drug-induced dementia and alcoholic dementias are not uncommon. So these are the various types of dementias which are seen. So Alzheimer's disease is a common degenerative disease of brain characterized mainly by premature and progressive dementia. Okay. So premature means before the maturity. That is, suppose the person has not yet achieved 60 years also. That time before that only the dementia, loss of memory has started. So slowly progresses. Okay. This disease degenerative because the neurons are degenerating. It is premature and progressive. So the cause is severe loss of cholinergic neurons projecting from basal forebrain to neocortex, amygdala and hippocampus. The fibers projecting from nucleus basalis of Maynard are severely affected. Cerebral atrophy mainly involves frontal, temporal and parietal lobes. Pronounced neuronal loss occurs in hippocampus, entorhinal cortex, parahippocampal gyri and subiculum. So these Alzheimer's patients are very common. So if you are having any elderly person in your home, so you can observe all these things. They have uh, memory loss, dementia, short-term memory and long-term memory. So as the disease progresses, they will not able to remember their own things also, familial, the habits also they will forget. Okay, the pathological features of this disease are presence of neurofibrillary tangles in the nerve cell cytoplasm is a hallmark of the disease. Okay, neurofibrillary tangles is a hallmark. These are fiber-like strands composed of hyperphosphorylated form of microtubular protein tau. Okay, so this is the protein for this tangles. And other features are appearance of neuritic plaques scattered throughout the cerebral cortex. The plaques contain amyloid protein as a central core surrounded by degenerating nerve terminals. Okay, and granulovacular degeneration of neurons, especially in the pyramidal layer of hippocampus. So these three are the important characteristic pathological features of the disease. These are MCQs and you should remember for writing in the exam, theory exam. And the features seen in the patient are usually the patient is above 50 and there will be progressive development of forgetfulness, and the disease starts with loss of short-term memory followed by loss of other cognitive functions, dysnomia, forgetting words, especially names, visuospatial disorientation, and paranoia or other special personality changes usually takes place. So if you are having any doubt regarding the terminology, you can always open your medical dictionary and see the words. So make it a habit of checking the medical dictionary every time you read the textbooks, because medicine is a very huge subject. So the terminology is also very difficult to understand. So if you get that habit of looking into medical dictionary, it will be easier for understanding the concepts. The treatment for this Alzheimer's disease is cerebral vasodilators, stimulants, and high dose of vitamins B, C, E have beneficial effects. And trials of oral physostigmine, choline, lecithin, and cholinergic precursor and agonists have yielded some results. So this is about Alzheimer's disease. So the applied aspects, we have seen the amnesia, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. So after knowing everything about learning and memory and the process of conversion of short-term to long-term memory, so I suggest you to retrain your brain by changing your method of learning. Okay, so not remembering the subject for that particular short term, that is suppose for during only before exams you will be reading and remembering only for that particular exam day. So afterwards, if I ask you any questions, you will not be able to say the answer. So I suggest you to make it a habit, always learn the concept and then make it retain in your brain for long term, because this profession is your lifetime. So you will not be leaving this medical profession. You will be doctor. You should know each and every basic thing. So that's why retrain your brain. So that's all for today's class. So uh, learn the definitions and classification and the basic mechanisms of memory and all those things which I have shown you and taught you. So make it a notes and keep it with you. So that's all. Thank you all.